Hey Brainiacs, welcome back to the show. It's Dwight, your host and best friend for the duration of this program. I'm so happy to have Joe Capozzi coming on today. Joe is the co-producer of the documentary A Peloton of One, which gave me the chance to learn what the word Peloton really means, and we're going to get into that. It's a documentary about advocacy and awareness for child sex abuse, particularly for those who suffered sexual abuse from Catholic clergy, which is Joe's experience as a survivor of sexual abuse from a Catholic priest, and profiling the awareness and some advocacy work that was being done to address this. And specifically, this documentary also looks at the lobbying and the efforts to change up the laws regarding statutes of limitations, which prevents victims from being able to successfully prosecute charges depending on how long it's been. With the long time that it can take people to work through the trauma and be able to finally report things, that has been very frustrating for many, many people. And this documentary addresses that and gets into that. Joe is a returning champion to the show because you've been here before. It's been a minute, though, since you came on talking about your film
right.
a while back.
When was it that I was on the last time? I'm trying to think.
I'm trying to think because you were also on the Rise Today podcast that I produced for Erica, right? You also came on there.
Yes. And that was a great conversation.
No, it was it was several years ago because it was also, it wasn't the same year Barry Crimmins movie came out. I saw you wearing a Barry Crimmins t-shirt in the movie.
Yeah.
We're talking about.
It's dedicated to him as well at the end.
Okay.
The guy.
I missed that.
Just at the very end, you see it come up, and that was important for me.
Yeah.
Because Barry Crimmins was, for the short time that I got to know him, and I still feel that not enough people know about him.
Yeah.
And what he did for childhood sexual abuse survivors, sexual assault survivors, the whole advocacy movement that he did when no one was paying attention.
Yeah.
So I always like to say Barry Crimmins, watch Call Me Lucky. You can find it out there online. I got to know him for a little bit. And in that short period of time before he passed, God, he made such an impact on me. Yeah. He really did.
Well, I mean, it's a thing that you've really, taken that charge and moved forward with, particularly telling stories. I remember whenever I see your name, I always think of this one little clip from the Erica's podcast because I was editing it. And I did this little teaser clip, and I pulled this part where you were saying, "And anybody out there who wants to tell their story, I'm here for you." And it was a very powerful little moment in the conversation, and so therefore, obviously, teaser worthy for the clip of the show that I picked. But you've gone on to really, that's sort of, would you say that that's kind of one of your ways you're fighting against the abuse now, is trying to help people's stories get out there?
Yeah, for me, it was what helped me. It was what, this was in 2008 was when I wrote a play called For Pete's Sake. And that was about my experience being molested by a priest and kind of living with that secret for 20 years. And, I wrote that out of encouragement from an acting teacher who said, he kind of knew that this would help me in healing because I was such an emotional mess when I came forward. But I was also in an acting class and I was around artists and actors that, God, thank God that they were there for me because they really, I think one of the things with people who go through any kind of like childhood trauma, and especially something that we keep a secret, once you do come forward with the secret, man, it's like so much comes at you, between family and friends and, the good and the bad and, knows what to say, or some people say too much. It's just a whole, and, I always say for me, it was like being in therapy at the time, which is an important factor in the documentary, A Peloton of One.
Yeah.
And, I had art and I had never written anything. I just, I was an actor who would say lines that were, written by someone else. But this teacher, George DiCenzo, he was another amazing man who passed away years ago. But he kind of like one piece led to another, and he's like, write your story. Who knows what, and I did like a monologue class from it. But from that, I kind of, before I even finished writing, and I had never written anything, before I finished writing the play, I booked a theater because I had to like force myself to, so I booked the theater and I told a lot of people because it was like I was doing that to myself.
They knew. Yeah.
And they'll ask after a while, what are you doing? So it was one of those things where, in my head anyway, I'd always see something or something kind of inspirational. I'd be like, wow, I'd like to do something, or man, maybe I could create something. And I just never followed through or didn't know how to maybe. But since then, I did the play, and then I met my wife at the first reading of the play. She came with with a friend of theirs. Yes. Yeah. And that's when I met my wife. Then when we did I did a short film called Confession about my experience. And she directed that. And then, through these little things, which led me then to a Peloton of One, which is, finally after, we were in production for a number of years. And the hardest thing about it was really just kind of, it's waiting on the distribution and wanting and hopefully getting it done right.
That's the amazing thing that as I've caught little bits here talking to a lot of like creative people who are involved in these kind of pursuits over the time, is it's amazing how difficult to me, the difficult and impressive thing is always the thing you made, right? I watch and I'm like, and I mean, it sounds really silly for me to do this. It's like you sent me a screener, you're kind enough to do so, and I'm watching. I'm like, wow, it's like a movie. I'm like, well, of course it's a movie. I knew he made a movie. That's what But you know how there's movies that look like movies and there's movies that don't look like movies. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Especially independent films. There's a wide swath. I mean, we live in a good age for things, but so there's a lot of like obvious talent and funding and everything that's behind it enough to make something that looks good and it is good. But then the hard part comes into when you're like, now how do we get it out there? And sometimes that can be hung up for years, right? As far as getting everyone to agree how it's going to be distributed.
Yeah. One is finding a distribution company that is maybe willing to take on a documentary of this subject nature. Even though there are, there's a lot of documentaries about this subject now, which is good because they all kind of take different perspectives and angles on it. But yeah, you sign with it. For us, we finished the film and then the pandemic hit. Okay. All right. And so film festivals, we were getting, hopefully ready to, and we had gotten accepted to some, but now they're all virtual. You're not having that like audience with, being in a theater with people and then having these conversations afterwards. So we would do these Zoom kind of Q&A talkbacks. And then, the movie got into the Greenwich International Film Festival in Greenwich, Connecticut, and won the Audience Award, which for us was each step along the way. There's always been that one thing that kind of moves you forward. And that getting that award put us on the radar of some distribution companies because they pay attention to the festival award winners, and especially the Greenwich Film Festival is a pretty well known and pretty established festival with a good reach. So that helped us kind of like we interviewed some distribution companies, and then we had to deal with clearances, right? Which is something that people don't think about, especially someone's going to make a documentary and they want to use all of this footage from different things. It's like, you got to pay for that, or you got to get an okay for that. And you got to do your due diligence to make sure that you have everything like cleared.
Who's terrible with that is podcasters. I mean, I see this. I'm in a lot of these podcaster discussion groups, like online and Facebook and whatever. And I'll tell you, it's approximately 9 times a day. Somebody's like, so how much So how much of a song can I use without? How much of a clip can I? It's like no, it's copyrighted, man. I mean, how many times?
Yeah.
How many people don't think about that? Even people who are out there producing content. I think of all the YouTubers out there who are like, man, I hope I hit it big someday. And it's like, you hit it big someday, all your stuff's gone. It's gonna be taken down or whatever.
I know. It's, and for us, fortunately, another lucky kind of a blessing was a friend of mine that I went to college with, fraternity brother, who kept in touch over the years. He helped us with the clearances. His, who he works for, his law firm, helped us. And we had these incredible young interns that were reaching out and getting us clearances, or, they wanted $5,000, or they said no, or they said yes. That stuff that we going into it, we were like, oh yeah, we know we'll deal with it later. Well, then it's time to deal with it.
Yeah.
And, they did an incredible amount of work pro bono for us, because there was no way. I mean, we raised money. It took a long time to raise the money. Between a GoFundMe that Dave Ohlmuller put together, and then we did a Kickstarter, and then John Bernardo, the co-director, and Steve Mallorca, the other co-director, and DP and myself, we would kind of do these. We had like a 20-minute teaser. We would go to these different, wherever anybody would want to watch it, and maybe invite friends, because we were always looking to just continue to try to raise money. And because we shot over 2 weeks, but it was a crew of 7 of us, and we traveled for 2 weeks. It's, you gotta pay people for their time. You gotta pay people to, we were lucky. We had some family and friends let us crash at their houses because we were literally going getting to each step of the way to, yes. All right, we need another 10,000. We need another 5,000. We need
And that is one of the things that people don't realize, is that the funding for something like this is one of the things that makes the end product look and feel so professional. Is that there just is a limit of, okay, you can be really talented, but I think the myth is somebody cruising around on their iPad making a huge indie hit is like, okay, yeah, but it's actually getting professionals, and there's a morality to that kind of work too, right? To where on the one hand, it's good to have people donating their time and energy, but it's also good that you're paying people who are skilled in this craft to get this message out there in a professional, expert way.
I've been on both sides of it. I've been on where, people ask you to help them out or, work on something that they can't pay you now. And it's like, if it's something that you believe in and it's someone that well, then you want to help them out, and you want it to, however you can help them, especially if it's a project you believe in. But from the technical guys, the camera guys, the sound guys, our crew, which became family. These guys, for me, I didn't know any of them other than I had met John, my co-producer, co-director of the doc, John Bernardo, and we hit it off, and we kind of joined forces. And he had this crew of guys that were just we were on the road. We got to know each other for 2 weeks. So it was, we started in Chicago and we came back to New Jersey over 2 weeks. So I guess the premise of the film, just to kind of run it down for people.
Yeah, because that's the bike ride, right? I mean, well, first of all, I didn't know what a Peloton meant. Other than you start right out with that definition, and I wonder, did it help or hurt that the brand became so popular?
I don't know. We tried. We reached out to them. We did try.
Yeah.
Never heard back. We just thought it was, well, there was another thing about getting the clearance for the word Peloton. All right. Oh. So, and our lawyers had to kind of just do some vetting and do some, kind of a report on, all right, this is what it looks like. You should be okay.
Yeah. You can't own the word, yeah, right. I could see that being. Right. But I loved the concept, because right away it hits it in the film where it's like it is everybody. There's a great quote of everybody's looking out for everybody's safety. You have this group. I mean, it's basically a group that's grouped together to draft off of each other and move faster down a bike ride, right? Am I right about that?
Correct.
I
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
it
No, it
correctly.
is. It's they they protect their lead rider, and you have them kind of surrounding that guy on the bike, and it helps with the drafting, and also just from kind of keeping other bikes away, and so they have that whole thing, and I think that title says it really about Dave does set out by himself on his bike ride.
Yeah.
And Dave wanted to do something, just like I wanted to do something, writing a play, something creative, something to kind of also be able to give back. Dave wanted to do the same thing, and he's an athlete. So he wanted to ride he lived in Chicago and he grew up in New Jersey, and he was abused in New Jersey at the church where his family still lives near in Montclair. So we wanted to ride back there. And so that's what we did, for 2 weeks, a crew of 7 of us, and we followed Dave and we mapped it out. There was a ton of pre-production, which there has to be. And we wanted to make sure that along the way, we're going to capture him biking, but what are we going to see along the way, and who are we going to meet? Well, there are great survivors doing incredible advocacy work from all around the country. So from Chicago, as we mapped it out, let's start finding people in different places along the way. Lawyers, survivors, advocates, therapists, legal experts. We have Marcy Hamilton. She's an incredible legal expert on the whole subject of childhood sexual abuse and statute of limitation reform, which we can get into later. But he, and how we cast the film? Social media. Like, just from the survivors and the kind of the advocacy community that I'm really, was a big part of, people were always wanting to help out. So I would send a message to someone like, in Chicago. Does anybody know of a lawyer who handles these kind of cases? And we would get information that way. And so we cast the film literally by me just like sending messages through Facebook. And, I think that, there's the good aspect of social media, right?
Yeah. It's
kind of like help.
Cool to see how there's the old saying about technology in and of itself isn't really good or evil, but it amplifies whatever it is you are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see that with the accelerated way in which you're able to do that. That's amazing that you gathered everybody through that. Huh. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And some
so
cool
that kind
people,
of
really cool people profiled in this story, which I didn't think about going into it, of like, here's all the people that you're going to interact with along the way, and not just people on the roadside being like, good for you, which of course is a huge part of that. I will say one of my personal favorite moments of the film is when he starts the bike ride. It was fascinating to see, I couldn't read his mind, of course, but with the way that Dave was looking around. And to me, there was this excitement and wonder. It almost looked like this that I see in my kids, right? Or when they're young, to go around and say like, wow, this is really cool. And what is this? Just everything. Everything's really cool. And there was that excitement. And then to meet all these really cool people doing cool things, to help people, which is really exciting.
Well, that's where it's like, I love documentary film. I watch everything, and, the subjects are important. Who's talking, who's telling their story, who's vulnerable, who's going to, open up. And yeah, we lucked out. I mean, and it wasn't like, we didn't do like casting sessions before. It was the crew and John and Steve, they had faith in me that, okay, he knows, the advocacy aspect of it and the survivor aspect of it. So in terms of like, we didn't want to just deal with clergy abuse. It's because it's not just about the church. We now know it's just prevalent everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So we wanted to be able to capture just that different, the same story, but different, be it a family member who's abused someone, be it, a coach that's abused someone. So we lucked out. We really got some. What did you think of Tommy Williams, the young kid that was in there?
That's exactly who I was about to bring up. I wanted to know what it was like working with and getting to know him. He was just an inspiration, I thought. And I kind of, it made me think about how just through his presence, his work, his existence, kind of, it makes this point. You know, you bring up, of course, with the film centering around statutes of limitations, there's a lot of talk about reporting and the time it takes to get into telling one's story and how challenging that is. And then here's this young man who I wondered if that's almost he's like a symbol in a way of kind of the new normalization of being okay to talk about your mental health for young people now. It's okay to talk about something that's happened to you, tragedy. It's not your fault, trying to internalize that message from a younger age for people. And you hope, it's working. You hope that people are feeling that way.
I think for him, you know, to have a kid so young, talking openly and so eloquently about it, so composed, and it's important, you know, it is, because I would, you know, when my abuse was happening to me at 16, 17, I wasn't going to tell anybody.
Yeah. Right.
You know, I was not going to tell anybody. No way. I didn't, you know, this was something. So for him, and that's usually like when we talk to people who've seen the film and they ask about how's he doing, and he's doing good. You know, he's doing good, but he's moved on more to like his life, living a kid. You know, he's now like 17 or 18. I think he's 18 now. Mm-hmm. So he's living life, because, you know, we could get into the whole thing about being an advocate for anything, for any kind of cause. It could burn you out. It could burn you out. And this kid put in so much time and so much effort and did so much that, you know, it's like you can kind of take a break. I know I've done that. Like you kind of take a break from it, because, you know, it can be a 24/7. Either you're thinking about it, you're talking to someone about it, you're trying to help someone, you know, it's just, and that's something that, you know, is another kind of the mental health aspect of it, that, you know, we want to be able to help, but it could really just burn you out. And I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've talked to others who experience where kind of like they have to step away, you know. And at first, when I would see someone make a post like, "Well, I'm taking some time off," you know, I wish everybody well, and I would be like, "Well, why are they giving that message out?" And now I know, like, why. I get it. It's kind of like you almost got to put up like, you know, out to lunch sign, like, because it just becomes. And so this kid, he's kind of like, he's just, you know, he's living his life, which he should. And he's because he's overcome so much.
Well, and to have this be a part of his life. And I think a huge thing you just said, to me, it takes kind of a faith in the community. It takes a little bit of faith in, you know, it's very difficult to have faith and trust in society or even in the world. You make that point in the movie in one of your kind of monologues with the camera, or sides with the camera, that it makes you not want to participate with the world, not trust the world, to have this experience. But then to say, can I trust my community to say I can step back and everybody else will keep going? The cause is still moving forward. It's because it's vital to keep your own mental health well. It doesn't help the cause for you to burn out. Right.
No, it doesn't. And it's just, you know, but that's also the importance of just kind of, you know, for the amount of therapy that I've had. Yeah. And, you know, being around people also, like my wife, especially, who understands, because, you know, herself, she's done a lot of work on herself. And, you know, it's important. It's that whole idea is like, I may not be able to, I haven't walked in your shoes. I may not know exactly how you're feeling, but it's about like, just knowing that it's okay to, maybe you need a little time, and maybe you need to kind of just, you know, my wife can see when my darkness is coming, you know, because I still deal with it, and she'll see it.
You're very
give me a heads up.
You're very pro therapy in the movie, and I thought it was interesting you guys chose to include a lot of those conversations that you were having with Dave about the importance of therapy. And and also an important conversation about therapy is the access to care, where he talks about the cost of being prohibitive. And he also brings up an interesting point, which is even if there was a recompense, He's like, I've known a lot of people that actually are like, I would like the organization, whether it's the church or whoever, to, they should pay for some therapy. There's part of that that's making amends and everything. But he was saying for him personally, he wouldn't want the money coming from there to go to therapy. And I felt like you were kept encouraging, like, but you need some.
Yeah, no, it's just, he does. And I don't know if he is, I don't think he's really made that jump, to really just, listen, it's not easy to find a therapist that you're comfortable with. Right. I've seen many different therapists, and, and it's not just about the therapist. Maybe it's just me or whatever but, I've just had those experiences where then when you do find one that you kind of connect with, or that at least you feel, especially for me, it was feeling safe. Okay. That I can say these things to this person and that they're not going to look at me like you are effed up, or like just judging. And because so much of, for me, you keep the secret for so long because what will people think, right? What are people going to think of you, that you, Joe Capozzi, that this happened to you and you didn't say anything? And with each year that goes by, you didn't say anything. And it's it's what we do to ourselves internally. And, I had gone to therapy before I even came forward with what happened to me, but I couldn't even be honest about the biggest thing that was bothering me. So it was like, I wish I could go back to those therapists and be like, oh, by the way, I'm sorry that I didn't say, what was bothering me.
It's very, well, it's difficult. I just, I had this experience very recently talking to someone about this, of the experience of saying something out loud that we've never, ever said out loud before. And I think for someone who hasn't had that experience, it's a remarkable experience. And I was curious. One of the things that is interesting is, as you guys are in there, everybody gets a chance to tell their story. And you mentioned, and you've talked about the first time, like when you ever come out to talk about it and you couldn't talk about it. And now you've told your story so many times. And I got to thinking, there's that scene where your parents are in this film and you're sitting there talking, and it was remarkable to me, you and your father having this dialogue back and forth. And you could tell it's a dialogue that has been had in your own heads and probably between each other, I assume, many times, right? And maybe in front of a therapist. Obviously for you, I don't know anything about your dad, but the fact that you guys are able to just talk about it, this is a part of our life and we can say it. There was a certain familiarity with each other and with the subject that was very powerful to me.
I'm glad I actually brought that up because my father passed away 2 months ago. And
oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's, we're still dealing with it. We're in it. But my father was a very empathetic man. That's what I got from him, is empathy. He really just, sometimes to a fault, that poor person or that poor guy or whatever. But man, he was so empathetic and he was so open and loving. So, my father's guilt was that he was the one, as you see in the film, who kind of brought Father Pete into our family. He, my father was a volunteer fireman. Pete was on the volunteer fire department. We would, we went to the Catholic church where Pete was a pastor at. And, he befriended, my father, and he befriended others as well. But all of a sudden, this priest started showing up, for Sunday dinners. And especially back then, it was quite a, like, wow, it's, to have the priest over, it's a big deal. And my father would always let him sit at the head of the table. Okay. So it's kind of that immediate trust, that immediate like pass. So this guy's, man of God, he's great. And, for my father, obviously part of when the abuse started with me, I thought of him and I thought of, how like crushed he would be to know this. And so that's, one of the small reasons why I didn't say anything for all those years. It's like, my dad's a good man So he didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve that. And, in the film, that day of production, when we went to my parents' house where I grew up, my mother's like, I don't know if I want to talk. My dad's like, and they've been involved with other things. Like, they know what I do, creating, film and art and all this other stuff. And they've always been supportive. I mean, they've come to see like the play I did about me being molested. And they just were always so supportive, especially my father, even though how tough it is to watch. But he, church for my dad it was not so much the religious aspect. He just found peace in a church, going to church on Sunday. It was almost like a meditation for him. It wasn't about, you better do this or you're going to go to hell. It was more just about, he found peace there. And so for me, when I came forward with what happened to me, for my dad, that was gone. The church was gone. And, in the film, when he says what he says about how he feels now, I thought of him when, I was in the hospital with him 2 months ago, and he had been on hospice for a few days, and we knew like the end was near. And everybody in my family was taking turns staying with my mom at the hospital, and it was my turn to stay. And we had been told 3 or 4 different times, it's like, oh, he's not going to make it. He's not going to make it. And, each time he kind of rallied. But that night I got to the hospital like 11 and was with my mom and my dad. And we kind of fell asleep about like 3 o'clock, and the nurse comes in at 4 and she's like, I think it's time now. And from 4 o'clock till 4:30, we were on either side of him. And I'll tell you, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Being there for him and my mom when he took his last breath, and kind of seeing the life slowly, squeeze out of him, but in peace and not in pain anymore. And how grateful I was to have that moment, but that how supportive my father was. And so when I see that scene, I watched it like a few weeks ago, and I'm like, I'm glad it's in there. I'm glad there's that scene when he can kind of stay for himself, his feelings. So it was, but he appreciated me speaking out. He appreciated, like, he always supported me, even though at times, and maybe it was a little uncomfortable because of things I was saying and feeling. But, both my mom and him, they felt such guilt over this. Mm-hmm. My mom, very angry. My father, very sad and upset. Yeah. Just because it was a long time where this person became part of our family. And so I think that's one of the things we think about when people do come forward with allegations of abuse. And no one wants to believe it, especially if it's like a family member or someone they know. No one wants to believe it. I get it, because it ruins so much, and that's how I felt. I didn't want to come forward. And when I came forward, there were people that didn't want to believe it, and that's one of the things where it's like, if my experience of going through that can help someone who's going to be going through it or is going through it now, that they just hear a couple little tidbits that I say, that, that's worth it. That's what we're about. I think that's why we should be here, to kind of help each other get through the crap in life.
Well, that's how you get results like that young man in the film we were talking about earlier, right? That's how we get to a point of it's normal to talk about. Unfortunately, I mean, if we're going to live in a world where unfortunately it's, let's say, mathematically normal, it's not normal, it's abnormal, it's twisted, it's all these things, but the occurrence is frequent enough that we can't categorize it as a weird thing that never happens, right? If we're going to live in a world where abuse is as common as it is, we got to make talking about it just as powerful and just as present. And that's a really powerful example. And that's where I had seen that. Yeah, I felt that as you guys discussed that in the film, that there was this, this depth to the discussion, that it's not that rawness anymore. There's no fear around. Not that there's not all emotion still, but there's that. And I have always loved when I see people get to this point where they have this powerful ownership, this depth of saying, yeah, that happened. This is terrible. And I can own it. And I can help others not have to be afraid of it anymore. And I think that's one of the powerful things about the work that you do.
Well, I think, it is a process. So, that sitting that day with my mom and dad and them expressing their feelings with a camera on about what, they felt going through it, that evolved, and that's over time, because there was a point when I first came forward that people were pissed at me. My family everybody takes a moment. They step back. They're like, whoa, what? And, people are offended for many reasons. Some of them is because, wait a second, I don't really know you. You didn't tell me everything about you. I said, don't take it personal. I didn't tell anybody, and I lost friendships over it, kind of like they feel betrayed in a way.
It's one of the most baffling sort of things that unfortunately is also normal in the sense that it happens a lot, right? People experience this, but it's such a weird, unhealthy reaction that people have to say like, "Oh, you lied to me. What did I owe you?" Okay, hold on here. I think I had a harder time going through it than you did. You were walking around not knowing about it, and meanwhile you're living it. They're walking around just not aware, and it's like then it becomes about them, which it happens. It happens, like you say.
But I think even bringing that up, where it's like we talk about it right now.
Yeah.
That this could be like a side effect of, or this is what, when you come forward with this type of secret, you can expect, A, B, C, D, and, and I think because I've had people kind of that I've reconnected with from that, distance themselves in a way. And I've reconnected with them recently. But they've explained to me, and at least we could talk about it. I'm not like, angry where it's like, where'd you go? I'm like, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And it's one of those things where there's some people out there that I hope one day that I could have like that conversation with, because, there are people that I was close with and, I'm not so much anymore, as a direct result of that or not. But it's kind of like one of these things where it's like, one day maybe we'll have that conversation.
Maybe. It kind of tells you, to me, sometimes it seems like it tells you who would have been a bad person to tell during the abuse going on anyway. It's like, why didn't you tell me? Oh, well, that reaction should inform you a little bit of what kind of, maybe you're not the best person to have told.
Right.
Based on how you're reacting when I'm telling you now. So, yeah, that's with one of the things that to get in the film when you were, I believe it was a good deal of this actually takes place in Harrisburg, where I grew up, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when you're talking to I think it was the politician there, the lawmaker there, and she was quoting some statistics. I may get this may have come from an entirely different part of the movie, but when they were pushing the statute of limitation law change in Pennsylvania, so this was a chilling statistic to me. Is that I did not know this. The average age of someone coming forth for abuse, particularly clergy abuse, is 52.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. And then there was unfortunately not surprising, I guess, but they say like a third, over a third never tell anyone, right? As far as they can tell. And of course, if you're estimating a group that never told anyone, it's got to be underrepresented because they never told anyone, right? I mean, that's
right.
That's how things work. And so with that being like a third of people maybe talk about it sometime while they're still in childhood, and then the rest are just not talking about it at all, or not talking about it until and then the statute of limitations issues come in when someone is not talking about something until they're middle-aged. And it's like, well, that happened decades and decades ago. And then you come and say, well, where's the justice? Well, it doesn't exist. We've prevented it by the way we've structured our laws.
Yeah, and I think that this is definitely, the laws are changing. And I think a lot of it is because people are talking and survivors come forward and, everybody shares their story in different ways, but when people start hearing, the certain common, things that arise, being like, well, I didn't tell anybody for 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, very few people, especially, kids who it just, for me, when my abuse started, I was like, I froze in myself, like as this kid, and it scared the heck out of me. And I'm never going to tell anybody that this ever happened. Mm-hmm. And then when it happened again and again and again and again, I was like, now I really can't tell anybody because, I'm dumb enough that I stayed in this and I stayed around this person. It's only through now that we have a better understanding of that, people aren't going to come out immediately. People, like you said, may never say anything. But I also think it's about the mental and emotional impact that it has on someone, and how, what we know more now about childhood trauma and how that affects us. Be it if you're abused or you go through a traumatic event when you're 6, 7 years old, 8 years old. I mean, your brain is still very malleable, still very open, and it just, for me, it was like, I looked at the world differently. I looked at everything, got very dark, and like, I was like, wow, the world is, as I say, is an effed up place. And do I want to be part of it? So we know all those things now, and the laws had to kind of catch up to the reality of what was really going on. And that's where they're getting there. But, there's always the insurance companies. They don't want the laws to change. The organizations, they don't want the laws to change. I mean, the church has spent so much money. The Boy Scouts are going through their own, upheaval. I mean, that is as bad as the church, mm-hmm. which then just informs us kind of like, how do these predators, how do they exist openly and quietly, and, in all these different organizations where you can have an adult, tower over a child and be given a certain level of trust. But I mean, that's changed now. Right. I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
Just in terms of awareness.
Well, you look at if anybody out there, has had, and I've been through. So my son went through Scouts and for a while, and my brother is actually now being kind of recruited. As his son is interested, and he was in Scouts, and he's being kind of recruited to do leadership and things that now they have to have like all kinds of trainings, and they have like 2 deep leadership techniques and things where nobody should theoretically ever be alone with a kid. That type of a thing, and a lot of involvement with parents and the different things that are seen to be, it's just a little bit more in people's minds and discussions now, which can't help but help, but you hope.
And people can say stuff too. Like, you're going to be more open to saying to whatever organization. So is it going to be just one person or 2 people with, or can I be in the room, with, it's like those things where now it's not like this quiet thing you have to ask quietly. It's like, no, this should be a matter of protocol mm-hmm. for a lot of these organizations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only, someone was saying to me the other day, it's like, well, I think, awareness gets raised and then it gets covered up again, and awareness gets raised, kind of goes and flows and stuff. I said, well, you know what? There's a lot of other things going on in the world too. So,
well, and that's always the way. I mean, it's one of those things where if it was easy to solve, we would have solved it, right? I guess I think that sometimes, and you can comment on this as more of it. You're a spirited and involved advocate, right? I do this podcast, right? And then I work with victims and things like that to help on that end. But that's my profession. And so there's a little difference here where you're going out there and you're doing a lot of advocacy work, and as you talked about that burnout and things. But to me, it seems like when people, nothing against your buddy who said that, but anyway, when people say things like that, and when people get frustrated and like, wow, it seems like we've been trying really hard and child abuse still exists, huh? I mean, I'm sure a temptation to just be like, yeah, I'm here every day, man. I know that's the fight, right? It's like, get used to being disappointed a little bit if you're going to involve yourself in awareness. That's kind of a down. That sounds like a downer thing that I just said, but to me, it's also inspirational because you see the same thing with any social justice issues. See the same thing with civil rights and race and equality.
Yeah.
People are like, those who are in a position of privilege get involved, and then it doesn't work out, and they get really mad right away. And those who have been struggling with the struggle for decades in their whole life are like, yeah, join the club. You want to help? Do you really want to help? Well, don't run away now when it gets hard.
Yeah.
Right.
It's I mean, there's no, you're not gonna end it. It's like anything else. It's just but the more you do talk about it, and the more you take out the stigma, right? Where you and I can have a conversation like this, talk about like some very uncomfortable topics, but it's nothing to be uncomfortable about. I mean, you get used to the terms, you get used to the grooming, right? I see that word now used all the time in different ways, right? Now, when I came forward in 2005, whatever, I didn't know what that word meant. I didn't know anything about that. I had to look through some book to see like a small little section about it. But I mean, that itself is a subject all to itself. But that word and that term, I think it's important when people know the terms and the words to use, when talking about such a sensitive topic. But, say I've been kind of involved for 17 years. I have seen the change from 2005 to today in many, many good ways, and some still frustrating, but, we're talking about it more than we've ever talked about it. There's lots of great documentary films out there and films, feature films, and there will continue to be content. I mean, and there needs to be, and there should be.
And I think one of the biggest strengths, I love this that's why I'm vibing on the concept of the Peloton thing, of keeping each other safe as this community grows, right? Of like, you met Barry, you meet Dave, they meet you, you meet the other people that come forward, you meet this kid, everybody then has a voice. And I think anytime that we have a community, there's more power, right? Because, as I heard, I got to see this documentary a while ago. It was about some journalists from Syria who were fighting against ISIS by getting the information out of Syria. And one of them, was able to come to the premiere of this documentary, and he got up and spoke afterwards, this Syrian guy, and he was talking about how he said that he has hope, that for him hope was a matter of faith, because he said that in the end the good guys will always win, because as long as there's at least one of us, the bad guys can't win, because they'll keep fighting, we'll keep pushing forward. And he said we all trend towards becoming better as a people, and nobody can change that. And so we win. Doesn't matter what they do to me. Doesn't matter what they do to you. And this is a guy under death threat, right? And all that. And he's like, it doesn't really matter, because as a group we win. And they know that. That's why they're scared of us. And it was a powerful concept. And I thought about that. There was a point in the film when you hit on just you talking a little bit after you guys were having one of these conversations about how you know Dave and how you worry about him, and you talk to him about this, and you guys are backing each other up. It threw me right back into that concept. Here's the Peloton, right? He's a Peloton of One, but he's creating where he's going. There's this community where now he's got someone in his corner worried about him. He's got someone else that he can worry about, and we can be there for each other and worry for each other, And you mentioned like your wife, and seeing like, oh, here's something coming in you, and then you got your kid, and you can see, and you have your father, as you mentioned, in your corner, and now even recorded, right? Even though he's not here physically. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great community building tool. And I just think, I'd like, I'll say thank you for making it, because, I think it's important for things like this to be out there for people to see. I should say, where do people, Where do people go to see this, by the way?
So you can, a Peloton of One, you can find it on Amazon. You could find it on Apple. You could find it on Roku. You could find it on Google Play, YouTube, rented on any of those platforms. Okay. So it's out there. So the best thing is just Google a Peloton of One, and you could I mean it's been great. It's been good to hear from people who watch the film, and the questions they ask and they bring up are the things that we were hoping people would get out of it, and so for this, the whole idea of statute of limitation reform, SOL reform, that is a big part of what our documentary is about. Because, there's so many documentaries that, you take a different angle and make it somewhat, different bits of information you're sharing. And for us, it was about SOL reform and also about survivors kind of coming through the other side and then turning whatever pain they had into this hope and this, this good work that everyone does to help, the next person. So those two things where it's like, we're dealing with the legal topic, which at times can be kind of like, to listen to. And I am not an expert. I defer to those. And we have a couple great experts in the film that know the law so well.
Well, you really tie it in with the human interest, though, because you layer it really well with the stories that you're hearing, too. And the lawmakers and lobbyists and lawyers that you have on there seem to be very personally invested, too, of course. And so to me, it was very compelling, even, during the bits where they're talking about, here's the ins and the outs of SOL law. That was fascinating.
I know.
It was fascinating, though, to hear, because it tied in with, I don't know, just the way it's presented, it makes so much sense to say, here's where it ties in. You have the one attorney who he mentions that, people protest that how are the cases going to go anywhere if it's been that long and everything. And he's like, but it doesn't matter. Give someone their day in court.
Well, that's what, that's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And, I always say, for me, that the word alleged always bothers me, because that's how I have to, in terms of my case and what I say against, Pete, the man who abused me. It's got to be alleged abuse, because I haven't had a chance or a day in court to have any kind of official ruling. I sued the church and I got my some pennies from the church. I did that route because you want to try to get some kind of justice. I mean, suing the church was more about making sure you put this guy's name out there, and to make sure that people are aware, because he's not on a sexual offender registry list. He's not. He's living in a retirement home in New Jersey, being paid for by the church. And I wasn't the only one he abused, and he's still being protected. So for me, that's something where I could start to talk about that and get fired up again, because that's the frustration, because people will ask, well, what happened? I'm like, nothing really. They retired him, and he's living in a retirement home that people didn't even know that there's a number of predators living in this retirement home. And it was only through, survivors like myself and others who speak out that people are like, wait a second, I live like a few houses away from that place. I have young kids. I didn't know. Well, they don't have to tell you, but we have to kind of be, that's why you got to be loud about it sometimes. So, so that's where I start getting I start getting that advocacy thing again.
It's good. I'm glad you're doing it. It's good you're out there. The as you said in the film, trying to make something good from this mess. I wrote that down in my notes. That and I think the good thing that you make, it comes through is you, right? The good thing is the survivors. That's the good thing, is that they're always been. They always even going through all that. You've always been good. Right. That's the message you're trying to send to people, is you're not damaged because someone else did something. They're damaged. They're the ones who were damaged going around doing this to people. Right. Damaged in the sense of being hurt. Obviously, I don't mean to minimize that at all, but I just mean there's nothing wrong with the people.
I use the term, they put their sickness on us. Mm-hmm. It's like you kind of transfer a bit of their sickness onto us who get abused. and then we become like infected, and that infection is the secret, right? And you keep that secret, and that infection just festers year after year after year. And for some, that infection will take their lives because they can't come forward, and for me, I feel lucky and grateful that I was able to speak up, because I was on the way to kill myself, and something just stopped me from that thought. But it's like that sickness is put on us, and so you got to talk about it, you got to be honest about it, and you got to put light on it.
Well, I'm glad you are. I'm glad that there's people like you who are out there putting the light on it. I'm glad you're doing it specifically. It's been, and I'm glad I get to meet you too. That's the best part of it for me, selfishly. Anyway. Well, I always like to have everybody share, and we've shared a lot of different avenues, but everybody share a charity that they like to advocate for, and you've obviously got a lot at your fingertips. Oftentimes it's one that's related to what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be. But what would you tell people to put their time and money and effort towards?
Well, it's hard. One of the things, because everybody seems to have a charity now, but Marcy Hamilton's childusa.org, and they're a pretty well-established charity, but the work that they do in terms of trying to change the statute of limitations, that's something that, it's like a behind the scenes thing that no one's really paying attention to. But an organization like that can always use the help as well. And that's childusa.org.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Anywhere people should check out what's coming down the pike from you and your work?
Right now, like I said, it's getting this film distributed. So we were we were released in March, and it's one of those things. Once we got released, it was kind of like I could breathe. We could breathe as a production team, and like the guys who I worked with, John and Steve, and the crew, JB and Jason and Moss. We'll work together again, and we have in different ways, but we will work together again because that group of guys is amazing, and they're working on some documentaries right now. One in particular about mental health, that hopefully that I could help out in any way, because those guys are just they're good humans. They're just like real good people, and I would say look for something in the next year or two hopefully from all of us.
And hey, I hope you come on here and talk about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.